It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. So, gentlemen, introduce yourselves and we can...
Oh, hey, I'm Chad Jetner.
Hey, I'm Peter Lawrence.
I'm Nick Brecken.
And I'm Kyle Bacher. And today we're kind of going to check in on the state of Agile and talk about some struggles and maybe some nightmares and things of that nature. So
that's why we have Nick here, is for the nightmares.
Let's have the airing of grievances, and then we can chat about it and how to deal with them.
Well, really quick, maybe Nick can talk really quick about a tiny little itty bitty history lesson. What Agile was supposed to fix and why we were so excited about it 21 years ago.
22 years ago.
Yeah.
What do you mean we?
I mean, me specifically, but
I don't know. I mean, if we remember, I think the common understanding was back then we were very what they would call waterfall, where everything kind of had to go through gates. You couldn't proceed with anything until everything was done at once. And people ended up with not what they intended. And there was no way to kind of pivot quickly and fix things. There was no way to discover it that something was going wrong in the first place. And so I think I don't really know full history of who these people were, but they got together and put together this Agile manifesto that really centers on just a few key principles. There's 12 of them, I think. My favorite one is that, about how the working software is the primary measure of progress. Everything else kind of delves from that. We all have our favorites. But at the end of the day, they were trying to get rid of some of the bureaucracy and really trying to free up engineers, developers to really solve problems with their customers rather than for that bureaucracy level. So in spirit, that's what Agile was supposed to be, that whole individuals and interactions over processes and tools and working software over documentation. And gosh, I haven't taken this test in a long time. Customer collaboration, responding to change quickly over following a plan and all that stuff. But with that came real popularity. I remember the first project that I was on where somebody tried to work in, quote, sprints, end quote, which was a 1 week, what they would call a sprint was just hey, I want to just kind of review things every week and see how it's coming along. And we've got 4 weeks to do it, but let's do it in this sprint work. So we'd plan it. Here's what we're going to deliver this week and review and make sure we're on the same page and the next thing. And it worked out, oddly enough. But I just remember hearing about it and being this is mind blowing because it was so incremental rather than boisterous and this is a 6-month thing. And oh my God, we're falling behind already. Anyway, was that good history there for you, Chad?
That was a pretty good history. And I think one of the most important parts of the whole Agile mindset was that it was thought of and created by people that build software, actual developers. So we know some of these names. I know some of these names, right? Martin Fowler wrote a bunch of extreme programming books. Ward Cunningham invented the idea of a wiki, right? Sutherland was there. Yep. I just had to look it up. I remember Martin Fowler and Ward Cunningham and Kent Beck. And the guys that came up with this whole mindset and philosophy were guys that actually built software, right? It wasn't people that didn't actually do the job. It was folks that had horror stories of waterfall or any other methodology at the time. I don't know how Six Sigma plays into, but all these other things that we used to be doing. These guys all got together. If I remember the story right, at a ski resort, and they had drinks. And they just wrote down a literal manifesto, like crazy people do, but well received and good. So
they didn't create it to sell books. They didn't create it to. They created it to solve problems.
They created it to solve their problem, which is the classic open source thing, right? Scratch your own itch, right? So that's what they did. They went out, they solved a problem, they wrote a manifesto, widely distributed, and then because of who they were, they had industry recognition. They had, a lot of these folks like Fowler's written a lot of books on the process of software development. So because of their name, they got traction. They got interest, and it was good. And like Nick said, one of the basic tenets was the best sign of progress is working software, right? And then iterative development.
It's like waterfall was structured and confining, putting everything in boxes and defining it all beforehand, being a prophet, some kind of future seer that can figure all this stuff out ahead of time. And then Agile was freedom, like, oh, we have breathing room, we have flexibility,
Yeah, but one of the challenges, and actually one of the best things that came out of Agile so far, is enabling that freedom as well. Having the ability to not just pivot quickly, but be able to deliver quickly, right? I mean, CI/CD and all the fun stuff you guys could speak to better, I just take advantage of. But the rather than trying to bunch everything up into this long, arduous weekend-long release that had to go through several, gates and stuff like that. A lot of good stuff came out of this to enable this way of doing something, to be able to deliver something into a production environment in an hour sometimes, you know what I mean?
Right.
That's a little extreme, but I think each one of these principles, the challenge for them was also just making sure that they could enable the possibility. And I think you've seen a lot of technology built around that.
Yeah. I mean, once this caught on, we looked at the way that not only the business, like the whole process of project management and everything else, but also inward a little bit and said, well, we can't even do, we don't have the tool set to enable really fast continuous delivery. So how do we do that? How do we automate this? And we just started automating things to the degree that, we talked about this with Cooper last couple weeks ago, right? Where we were talking about, when Peter and I were young, our tool chains and our CI/CD was really probably just one of us with a bunch of scripts and a checklist, right? Instead of, hey, you commit your code and all of a sudden everything builds and deploys and blah, blah, blah. And it's just magical and beautiful. Our old way of doing that conflicted with Agile. So we, not me personally, but developers created an entire suite of tools to satisfy most of the 12 tenets of the Agile principles here.
Well, and I think a couple of things lead to Agile from waterfall, right? Back in the day, my earliest days of development, I was not developing software for the internet or for a web browser. I was developing it to put on a CD-ROM and ship out and install from a CD-ROM. You didn't want to send out multiple CD-ROMs that you screwed up or anything like that. Yeah, but also the process to get to the CD-ROM was, thankfully we had at least CD-ROMs back then, but that there just wasn't that kind of turnaround time that you could do. You couldn't even possibly think of doing production releases in an hour because the mail service was not that fast. Even FedEx can't, mostly ship something across the country in an hour. And I think that has helped lead to it, but also the internet, putting things on a web browser, and people going so Wild West, and having the Wild West meet the stodgy old, East, Near East, whatever, and come together. And eventually they got to the point where Agile was born, right? And because it was needed.
It's very idealistic. But and so we're talking about some of what it enabled from a technology perspective, but it also started to create, well, how do we do this? How do we change our management structure? How do we create teams? Like how do we, not just technologically, but how do we structurally build an ecosystem to do this? And you're asking a lot of people to shift a mindset from being in the minutia to ensure their CD-ROMs worked when they shipped them off, because you don't want to be responsible for screwing up 1,000 of those. Yep. To it's okay if it's not perfect, right? You know what I mean? Like it's a mind shift that is. I still witness it. It's still a challenge.
MVP didn't even exist back then, right? Most, viable product. No, it had to be done.
No, the whole shift in thinking and getting away from that, world of, do you have a Gantt chart? Where's the Gantt chart? We need a Gantt chart. Waterfall.
Well, and that does lead to freedom the problems, right?
Yeah. Like if I can just go and get her done and then go, is this your card? And they go, no. All right. Am I closer? Yeah, that's the right suit. It's a face card. You're getting there. All right. I just want to mention Slapjack. I don't know why. It's a horrible.
No, that's a good. I mean, that's not. I mean, yes, it is. I get the spirit of that. That's good stuff. I appreciate it.
But honestly, because the business, I think, still sometimes they still want a Gantt chart. They
do.
still want that.
And we're kind of coming back to that a little bit because I do feel like on some level, Agile has been so successful that we don't even recognize its success in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you took it away from us, it'd be like, oh my gosh, wow. At the same time, it's probably overcorrected some other spaces as it pertains to, frankly, I'll just call them the triple constraints, right? Like at every software project or any project, there's funding that's required. There's, an understanding of what resources to do it. There's scope, there's timeline. Those things still matter, and you still have to get some level of visibility into it and a means to deliver success incrementally. When it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes it is like, we got to have this thing flawless before we can press the button. And it's a whole great deal of things. So there is still space for that. And I think that a lot of organizations have started to say, I need better management of those things, the triple constraints. What's hard is the easiest way to manage them is to know them up front and then say when we're sliding off of them.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a lot harder in an incremental space when you're trying to say, how do you structure a team even and a cost when you don't know where you want the end, to be, or you think you know the end. And so there is a trust factor to this that requires professionals to understand that, happy medium of understanding that where you want to be and how much we think it's going to cost, how much time it's going to take right now is probably not where we're going to end up. But on our journey, you'll start to see some return and value, and we'll probably uncover things that we didn't know about that will help us as much as maybe perceive as hurt us in this moment. But that's also a mind shift. And that's also, when people are spending money, they're a little bit more controlling and less interested in that sometimes.
Nobody goes to the board every 2 weeks and says, all right, for the next 2 weeks, this is what we're hoping to accomplish, and this is how much it's going to cost.
Yeah.
And then do that every 2 weeks until you get done, right?
Yeah.
And that's just not the way the business thinks or funds, right? It's right. Just not how they fund things.
But I do think that the majority has started to recognize we know where we want to go isn't going to be where we're.
So Nick, when any time throughout a project, one of the sponsors could drop in and say, "Where are we at with the triple constraints?" and expect you to be able to give an answer. are you ready for that?
We're jumping the gun a little bit. So that role is known as the project manager typically, but we kind of jumped. We went from the origin of Agile to circling back. Within that, there was quite a bit of shift from project management offices to more like product or Scrum spaces. Scrum became kind of the chosen means, hopefully enable the Agile mindset, right? So its structure was to shorten iterations to deliver something quickly, more efficiently and effectively. It wanted to achieve all of those principles of delivering software quickly, allowing change, opening the teams up, making sure that they had what they needed to succeed, so on and so forth. And I think what happened was that became a little mechanical rather than not spiritual, but it became the definition of Agile, when Agile's definition is actually quite literally the same website it was 20 years ago out there.
The same horrible design too.
Yep.
I just popped it up, and I love that they didn't. I love that they never changed.
It's just more languages, I think. It's just written in more languages. Yeah.
But so Nick's talking about Scrum. Nowhere in the Agile Manifesto do they talk about daily stand-ups or or sprints or Scrum of Scrums or all of these things that the implementation of these things seem to have really soured folks on. I mean, Agile gets a bad rep because all of these other things that Scrum implemented. So Scrum is the implementation of Agile in practice, right? So
in colloquial terms.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so I think the manifesto gets a lot of negativity thrown at it because what we actually deal with day in and day out is daily stand-ups and sprint retros and sprint goals and story points and all of these other metrics associated to delivering software, and meetings and meetings and meetings, and the meetings are probably one of the biggest soul suckers of the Scrum process that I can see, right? Because daily stand-ups should be great. And especially when we were back when we were in person, right? You literally stood up. This is what I'm doing. It was a conversation between developers. It eliminated roadblocks. It was fine, right? Nobody had a laptop. Nobody was looking at a burned down chart or anything. They were just like, hey, what are you working on? You stuck? Do you need help? Yeah, we could have conversations with each other face to face and actually resolve issues, sometimes in the stand-up itself. But now that we're all remote, it feels to me like, and this isn't just this has been the case whenever I've attended a remote stand-up. It is just a call sheet. Hey, what are you doing? I've got the thing. You still on the thing? Boy, you estimated that thing as this little thing, and it's been 3 days. Like, what's going on? And then it feels like roll call. Oh, hey, yeah, no, the director's going to listen into our stand-up, right? They're just kind of curious on what's going on. And then this other person's going to be there. And now the stand-up is 25 people, 12 of who are actually building things, 13 of who are now
extending the meeting to an hour.
So for me, that is probably one of the implementation of just the Scrum implementation of Agile for me it's ruined it for me, right? Like I just have such a bad taste in my mouth about
what was your hope for it before this all happened? What did you
here's the thing.
Like? What were you excited about?
I've done Agile without project managers, without Scrum masters, without anybody, right? Like we've had developer-led teams where it was all just devs, right? And hey, we're going to do a daily stand-up in person, but like I was saying, like it was in person and it was productive. It didn't feel like a chore. It is possible to do all of what the manifesto trying to enable, without actual roles around that. I know, Nick, that's your role, but like smaller teams can do this quite easily, right?
I mean, Chad, I'll tell you two things. One, my opinion, a good Scrum Master is trying to work themselves out of it. Two, I think the majority of what you're complaining about is what happened was a shift from project management and PMOs and monitoring and controlling Scrum.
Yes.
And what happened was the former PMs who were used to controlling and monitoring things are now being asked to coach and let go. Like it's dissonance, right? It's just like if you don't understand why, like stand-up's a great example. Before, a project manager would have a daily status, right? You remember those? You'd have a status call and it would take an hour or two and we'd be going through a project plan line by line. Where are we with this? What's going on? And the stand-up was supposed to be like, you know what? We only need to kind of touch base on what are we working on? Are you blocked? Do you need anything?
Yep.
Okay, go. And it's called a stand-up because you should stand up because you don't want to be there for an hour standing, right? It's supposed to go fast, And those are the best ones are led by the development team, someone on the development team, somebody who's doing the work with everybody else. Those are the most successful and best teams that I've ever been a part of.
Yes.
Instead, you have former PMs who are trying to show value and sometimes get lost in the fact that you're in the way, and that when you see the team doing what the practice of Scrum is actually calling for, step away, celebrate it. Yay, I don't need to do that now. Go figure out what the other opportunities are, because there are. That's the other thing. While we want to work out of a job, there'll be other things to go coach, and people will slide out of good habits. We got to bring them back into good, right. So on and so forth. But no, I think agree more. And I see bad Scrum mastering happening and really bad implementation of Scrum, where they nailed the mechanics of it. We have the meetings, we've got the cadences, but we're missing the spirit of it, of what it's supposed to enable. And they're so rigid. Oh, if we don't have it on this time at this day, we can't do the next thing. Well, what if the situation calls for not having it? It's okay. Like, you should be open to that because it serves the working software or it serves the team better. Like, there needs to be some awareness of that.
Yeah, and it's more like checking a box. We had our daily Scrum stand up. Yep. Today we had our daily or our weekly or our sprint wise review of everything, and nobody spoke up, nobody cared. It was all super painful and horrible.
We're supposed to look for the value of things. And when you see it, don't get in the way. That's it. You know what I mean? Like, look for value everywhere as a Scrum Master, as far as I'm concerned. That's really what it is. Are we getting what we need out of these things? And if not, we should be reassessing and thinking of different ways of doing it then. And it doesn't need to be so rigid.
Right.
A lot of people are scared of that. Yeah.
Yeah, the rigidity is you're on a project, right? Maybe you're 80 sprints in, 85 sprints in, but every sprint you're still doing a retro, right? You've had 85 retros and you're still, not that you stop doing retros after a certain time, but holy smokes. I mean, it just seems like it's a habit and not a thing that
well, it's non-functional, right?
Exactly.
If your team isn't functioning after 85 sprints, you did something really wrong about 75 sprints ago when you could have torn down the team and started over because.
But what's the purpose of a retro, right? It's reflection. It's team self-reflection. Do you need to do it every 2 weeks? Probably not. But to establish a trust and a fun team to work with, there's taking a moment and valuing the moment of just not talking about how do I solve this next problem or do this next thing, but just look inward a little bit to be like, hey, what worked for us? What was going good? There's value in that. But if you're just doing it to do it, don't do it.
They don't have to be every sprint, right? They do have to be every sprint for sprint 0 through whatever.
Yeah.
Until you guys start going, okay, we got all the big things worked out. Let's expand this up a little bit.
I mean, you're establishing a team, right? That's really what Scrum's all about. You're trying to establish a team that's predictable, like
forming, storming, and
norming, forming, norming, So, and storming, and so yes, to create the awareness to have self-reflection, you might have to do it a little bit more often in the early days, especially as you're learning to work with each other and. Just trying to figure all this stuff out. It's also an opportunity, some people don't want to do it. And so they don't see the value in it. So sometimes it requires a little bit of nuance with it as well to encourage the practice because it does have value. And, you've been on teams, right? Teams of many that not everybody marches in the same direction. Not everybody has the same mindset about things. You know this, right? And yet, when you're trying to take a bunch of individuals and create an effective working team, these things matter. And Scrum is just saying you need to take time to do that. Here's what is the defined Scrum process. But ultimately, I think it's on the team to decide how often should we do this. But you really should do it. You know what I mean? And not just demean it. I've also been on the other side of it, Peter, where team struggles, but every time we want to do a retro, everybody's like, I'm too busy, and we cancel it. And they just keep canceling it. And they never take time to reflect and never take time to get better. And they demean it. Right. So it does go both ways. And just like anything, you're trying to find that happy medium, which is really, I think, where we are right now with maybe not Agile, but maybe it's almost like we need a remarketing or a relaunch of what Agile is and why it matters and less about how to do it.
Well, I think the why it matters, it's you need people to believe in it and be convinced. So you have to basically everything you're doing, everything you're having them do that they're going to bristle against. You need to overcome that. And the attitudes of, negative attitudes about it that make it more difficult. So you should be able to answer for the why for every one of these, doing a retro, doing a stand-up, like being able to kind of onboard the team into that and take them through that process of here's why we're doing this, here's why we're doing this, here's why we're doing that, and get everybody on the same page. And then as you move forward, you're going to have to go back and reconvince some people and make adjustments. But how do you deal with that, Nick? Do you have answers to all those questions?
Which question? Which one in particular?
Do you know the why of everything that you need to do to do Scrum or Agile or, run the team?
No. But I think that's part of the purpose of Agile is to make sure that you're taking the time to think about it. But the things that I've learned are when you do a project plan and your objective is to meet the project plan deliverables, you lose track of why you're doing it. And that value gets lost, and you end up just being married to the activities of the plan rather than the purpose of the project. So there is kind of that happy medium. I guess I got lost in which question we were trying to answer.
I guess
but I will say
the core of it is the whiff 'em, like what's in it for me? I'm a
Yeah.
developer on your team. You want me to do these things. What's in it for me?
Well, I think it gets down to delivering value to your users or customers or whatever you're building the software for. Ultimately, that's what we're all trying to do. And I
Right.
think it's that's the main spirit of it. That's what's in it for you. You have a job, we're paying you. It's you're developing and building something for a purpose. Do you know what that purpose is? To me, if you don't, but you're just here to code some stuff, that's as troublesome to me as a leader saying, I just need some developers to solve, to do this thing. Like attitude to me is what's an anti-pattern. You know what I mean? That goes against things that we really need to understand why we're here, why we're at this company doing this thing. Some of it's trivial, so it doesn't really have a lot of meaning, but ultimately it's still contributing to something what we hope is interesting anyway.
I have often wanted to write a modern version of that manifesto that applies today. And not just, so a given, I think that manifesto is idealistic and it's perfect for startups or, new companies, engineer-led companies, right? That's great. That's awesome. But like we've been saying, we oftentimes will consult for large corporations, and we are on a project that has a budget, one of your constraints, right? And there's got to be a way to still do Agile, to still do the practice of it within all of these big constraints and still show value in something. And it's not Scrum. I mean, I've seen some diagrams of Scrum processes that are more complex than a Netflix technical network diagram, right? Like it's disheartening.
Yeah, I feel like Scrum works for what you said, like startups with simple, not so complicated. And then they tried to kind of shoehorn it into Scrum of Scrums and trying to like just build on top. And there is still an elusive solution to these larger opportunities. But I think the mindset of I want to build something at a small increment to ensure we're on the right page, that we're delivering what it is you want, to encourage opportunities to collaborate with your customers or end users or whatever, right? By saying, hey, I built this thing in 3 days. Can we go over it? Because that yields creativity, that yields collaboration, that yields a better, not just product, but I think probably company and ultimately more satisfying environment.
Well, that was a whole shift in mindset for IT, was getting the business involved, and becoming like, what did IT do for us instead of what did IT do to us, by dumping this thing on our lap and saying, okay, we've got your new tool for you. It'll revolutionize your work and you have to use it. No one talked to me about it.
Yeah, I think why is always the most important question to ask whenever you're starting somewhere, whether it's a huge corporation or just getting started. I think it's undervalued. I think when you walk into a place and it's like, this is how we've implemented Agile, I think it's okay to say, well, why do we do it that way?
Right.
What do we, because I'm sure that the reason for it made sense when you did it. But if you're just doing it because it's become the thing, is it still serving us? And maybe that's an opportunity for a retro to talk about, does this still serve us the most optimal, right? It's safe, it's familiar, but is it necessarily the best thing? Same with like coding, right? There's probably coding practices that people fall in love with and just it's safe, it's familiar. They don't really want to hear of a new one, but you know what? There might be a new one that works out really, really well that serves your purpose better. You just kind of got to get, you got to ask why.
That really ties it together, Nick, to put it in those terms. And seriously, because you do get into those habits, right? It's a habit. It's not really anything beyond that. It's like when I write this piece of code, I always write it this way. Determine that that's the wrong way. Oh, okay, I'll switch. Sometimes people are willing to say that. Most of the time it's like, yeah, but I do it this way.
I get that same way when I change like tool sets, right? When we went from Jenkins for our CI tool to
right.
What did I use? Bitbucket had their own built-in thing, and now we're using something else. And every single time I'm like, it works, right?
Right. Do I really have to learn another one?
Yeah. And I'm in that same thing again. I'm like, I'm in the GitHub ecosystem now, and please God, don't take that away from me, because it works beautifully, and I'm not going to change. And you can't convince me that there's value in learning yet another brand new CI/CD thing, where at the end of the chain, I'm still going to get an application deployed out to the cloud, and it's going to work, and it's going to be great.
But asking why, the answer can still be do it the same way.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because that's what makes it's always good to review. I mean, we're in the ingenuity business, right? Like,
I hope so.
So we should always be looking for the next evolution, but it doesn't necessarily mean you adopt it. It just means, but that's the creative space that is super fun, but it's also what gets in our way sometimes because we're trying to be so agile. We're going too fast and doing too many things. That can be an enemy of agile where you're over producing what you need to do to get something done.
I know you commented on sort of asking why. And, it reminds me that a lot of these teams came up with their agile practices or their scrum practices through, I don't know, attrition and whoever's idea won and that kind of thing, rather than, taking a step back. And just like with software development, sometimes you do need to take a step back and say, well, we did it that way. But was that the right way? Is that still the right way? And I think that's what you're saying is like, maybe don't ask why, but ask, is that still the right way?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think what you'll find is a lot of people where it's been, I think the challenge with it is we've become so accustomed to how we've done it. When you ask why, it's insulting.
Yeah.
But it's one of the spirits of Agile is, assume positive intent. It is
right.
Trust. It is like it's okay. It's not an it's like literally to the questions.
Well, I think there's kind of a delicate situation you get in when you walk into a new project and you want to ask why. Well, you don't want it to be, well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? That comes across as like complaining and being a know-it-all. And so how do you just like ask those questions without coming across that way?
I will tell you I've onboarded folks on recent projects, and I was just talking to one of our colleagues. He joined a project and he goes, "Hey, I just got a quick question," right? Or no, how did he phrase it? It was actually kind of perfect. He's like, "Hey, I've got a quick question," and then he'd just bring up the thing like that he's looking at, and I'd be like, "Listen,
I don't have a quick
right?
answer."
You didn't even have to ask the question. I think a lot of the questions that people might have around either a built product or the way we've done something, the way we've either implemented the technology solution or designed a practice that we do. And usually all you have to do is just mention it, like especially as a new guy, and say, "Hey, I have a question about blah." And I'll know all of my all the dirty little secrets on our project. Because if you just mentioned, "Hey, I'm looking at the way we're doing this and connecting these two things," I'm like, "Here's the deal, man." and so and it's never offensive to me, right? Like even if I think I threw something together elegantly, and somebody else, especially younger developers, come along and say, "Listen, Grandpa, we're not really doing that anymore. We're doing blah. Great, we'll do that on the next project." Not this, right?
Let's try to work that in somewhere. Why don't you go ahead and do a proof of concept and let's take a look at that and we'll see, right?
Zipper merge into the project.
Oh, zipper merge. I wish so many Minnesotans would do zipper merge.
And I wish they wouldn't get so angry when you try. I think that's my thing. It's you don't have to do it, but don't get mad at me.
Don't get mad at me when I pass a mile of stopped cars that aren't using both lanes.
These are people who are not adopting an agile spirit. You guys,
that's right.
They don't see it's a better way because they're so used to how it's been done. And
I will give you guys that, except in one case. On 394s, you're driving into Minneapolis, right? The left two lanes go into downtown Minneapolis. The right two lanes go on to 94. One of them goes east, one of them goes west. If you're going to block the left lane because you're trying to get into a 94 exit as late as possible, I'm going to be upset with you. Right?
That's not zipper merging. That's a whole different thing.
That's a nightmare.
Called being a jerk.
That is
right. That is not the spirit of zipper merge. They are abusing. Yeah.
I would always say they built all this runway. Use it, right? Yeah. Except if you're on 394 and you're preventing me from getting to Northeast Minneapolis.
I mean, it happens. Yeah. My way, it happens up at 35W where it breaks into 94 West and East, and people do the same thing.
There's a few spots that somehow need magic that just doesn't exist in our world yet.
I try to believe that they didn't mean to. They didn't know this happened. They're just new drivers. That's it.
All right. So Scrum has been a rough patch for you, Chad. You have a lot to say about it, and it's all like valid. I haven't heard anything that's like not a problem or not real. So how do we make it better?
Stick to the script.
No, the script is the problem. The the routine and the tedium and all of that. I mean, one of the ideas with Agile is that we're supposed to be able to do this kind of indefinitely, right? We're supposed to keep up a certain cadence, and that's a nice ideal. But the current implementation and practices, at least that I've been in it, here's the thing. I'm spoiled because I had a decade where we were able to implement 100% engineer-driven company, 100% engineer-driven agile practice, and everything else, right? And it was, we didn't do, for a decade, right? Yeah, we did retros frequently at first, less frequently towards the end. Every routine, every practice, all of it was, I actually looked forward to going to stand-up because it was usually fun. I looked forward to our release days because it was a celebration. I looked forward to a lot of the events because there were no, it didn't seem like anything I was doing was unnecessary, right? The story pointing exercise, the sizing exercises, the stories that we were working on, the tasks that we were working on, we came up with the tasks. We didn't have this large overarching, like, oh, why is this stuck for blah, 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 right? As engineers, you just see it and you're like, yeah, that's a pain. And
yep. Put a task in.
And so the reason I get grouchy about what we deal with today is because I had this brief moment of like bliss and paradise and living through every single ideal of, every single one of the 12 manifesto principles.
What happened?
I feel, yeah.
No, what happened?
What happened?
Yeah, like did that? Like, feel like this is a situation where I'm trying to figure out who's the business. How did that?
Well, it was a small company. What happened was we got purchased by a much larger company, and then there it is, yeah. And hey,
now we must serve.
Well, and not only that, but just the oh, you guys are doing this all wrong. Are we though? Because you liked us enough to. So anyway, all of that happened. I had a wonderful experience with it, and then abruptly didn't. And I haven't since.
Well, that's the problem is when you know how good it can be, you know how bad it is.
Go ahead.
I feel you. I think many places have implemented some form of it, but not right. I think I'm not sure we've lost optimism on the subject of Agile. I think we've lost the spirit, and we should get back to the roots of that. And I think it comes to, I mean, Chad, we've been talking about it all day here, but it's like, it's not called a retrospective in Agile. It's a reflection. It literally says at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts behavior accordingly. It doesn't say every sprint. It doesn't say when. It doesn't even call,
Yeah.
The nomenclature has been sort of taken on by implementing Scrum. I do think it's become commoditized, but I also think there's some good things about that because on the other hand, you can also walk into a place and not start from scratch, but the problem is we're trying to get back to what was good, and sometimes those established practices are in the way. And so I think it does maybe come back to, should we pull up the quotes of the 12 principles and say, are we serving this? I don't know how religious that sounds, but like ultimately, I have yet to meet somebody who doesn't really agree with those principles. And principles are not rules. They are not cadences. They are not structure. They are principles. They're means to achieve something that's sort of bigger than those things. So I think we should be asking, does it serve that or not?
And I think one of the key principles, the one that I always focus around is when I can, because the current role, I can't just say, yeah, we're not doing all of this, right? We'll do all of the things, right? But the one I love is building projects around motivated individuals and giving them the environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done. That's huge, right? That is massive and that doesn't, directors and managers and middle managers and all sorts of non-builders in every single is the opposite of that principle to me, right?
So Nick, you come at it from more of a top-down perspective, right? You're at sort of the project manager type level of things, more at the business level.
I'm a convert. Yeah. I started at the top down, convert to grassroots. We want to work with you and
are there things that developers can do to slide out from under sort of that thing that Chad was talking about where, I mean, a product owner needs to be involved, absolutely. But They don't have to be at every stand-up. They don't have to be at all of the things necessarily, right? They do have to be involved.
Yeah, they're adding value or getting value. I mean, these are. I think what we're dealing with I think it's the bad apples kind of ruin everything, right? I think that the oversight and the overhead you're seeing is because motivated people. Well, sometimes they're not, and sometimes they're taking advantage of our trust, and there's been enough exposure to that there's been an attempt to try to correct it with more structure and opportunities to have that oversight. So it is rare when you find the team that really is living these principles, and it's super fun. And Chad, I've seen it and witnessed it and been part of it, and it's so good, and it is so fun, and it is engaging, but it does take the right mix of players that's hard to find. And I think a good Scrum Master is trying to take the group of players that they've been dealt and make a team that functions in the way that we all seek and have experienced. Unfortunately, maybe some people haven't, so they don't really know, so they just live in the structure, and they don't know why the structure exists. But it is to build those teams and have that efficient, because it becomes efficient, it becomes fun, it does produce, it does become predictable, it does give all the things that you want, which is serving the funder, you know what I mean, but also producing revenue generating products and solutions,
right?
All while doing it in a way that's super creative, engaging, and I don't know, repetitive, frankly, and fun.
Repeating the fun rather than just repeating the things.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, there's a reason that, on my teams we do certain. I mean, it's almost a joke now, the happy hours that we do and blah blah blah. But as far as creating and being around motivated individuals, yeah. That's one of the things that, I'm not saying we're motivated by booze, but it is a thing that we've heard multiple times. We're like, oh God, no, this team is fun. This team is, hearing that is validation that maybe a couple of the things that we're currently doing, even within this structure that we have, there are things that you can still do. And I'm not just saying bring your team to happy hour all the time. That's what works for us. But there are things that you can do to bring a little joy back into, and maybe we are not going to get through all of those in 6 minutes. But
I was going to say, we haven't even, how much did going remote and COVID and stuff kind of, not just interfere, but also kind of expose some of those holes that Agile as we seem to know it had. This to me is we're in a pivot point a little bit, and I think we're all trying to search for the same thing, which is just rediscovering the magic of that sort of small startup group team, but applying it to an organization of several teams, and it's an elusive.
I think we're going to have to do a follow-up podcast and try to figure out how Stella can get her groove back.
I think a good, we could talk again if Nick's available. There are so many other things that this process leads to, and especially this process is practiced by larger companies. And I mean, the biggest one that I deal with is burnout, right? The opposite of a motivated contributor is burnout. And I don't want to just, I want to actually talk about real things that we can do to address that. Not just sit next to somebody that's going to Google, hey, my developers are burned out. How do I fix that? Right. And say, oh, we should blah. No,
icebreaker.
We should icebreakers, or we should,
icebreakers.
3x5 cards. Gotta have them.
But I would love to get into what are the other ways we can fix this? I don't know that we've gotten too far into that. How can we fix it? How can we better motivate people? How do you deal with the fallout of a poorly implemented Scrum practice? And how can we be less jaded the whole process?
Well, just like anything, incrementally. You're not going to do it overnight. You're going to have to find a thing, a little bit. Ask yourself, where do you want to be in June? Not where do I want to be in 2 weeks, right? And think about some of those things.
I mean, are we talking? It's almost like technical debt, but it's almost more of a process debt that you've accumulated. And how do you pay that down? How do you get out of that debt? Being stuck in a pattern, and it's not retros.
It's often the people too. I mean, just to be honest, right? It is trying to figure out how to connect and how to resonate a message with people to change. One of the things that I always find fascinating in a Scrum practice is when I say, why can't we release when we're ready? And everybody's like, well, we release at the end of the sprint. And it's like, but if we can deliver, like, you know what I mean? Like, and just having that wrestling match a little bit with, and to be fair, when somebody did this to me for the first time, when I was trying to build a structure and they were like, well, we can release now, I was like, wait a minute. What? And it took me a sec. But see, I feel like the people matter, and understanding why we're doing these structures and that these are just guidelines, they are not rules, I think goes a long way. But you have to have people able to express that and gain buy-in, because, you know, you might have a great idea, Chad, to get out of this rut or have, you know, some means to do it, but you might not be the problem. It might be the person or people who we need to build that through. And that takes different skills and relationships. It's not just, oh, we're going to do 3-week sprints now or 1-week sprints. Like, you know, that's not solving the problem.
That's not going to fix it, is it?
Yeah.
Just
you know
fiddling with it.
Yeah, so it's getting back to
let's try this. Let's try that.
Yeah, it's getting back to the spirit of why we're doing things and why it matters, and that context, I think, goes a long way. And I do think sometimes it would be good to have this manifesto open and just look at what is the problem you're having in the moment, which principle does it probably apply to, and see if you can't construct a more effective argument for change in that moment rather than a complaint. Right?
I think that's a great parting thought.
That's a good lead into our next one.
Anything else?
And you get a parting thought?
I'm not going to top what Nick just said. I'm
sorry.
No,
I can't either. So, Peter, you got anything?
Nope. That's a perfect
Well, I guess you win, Nick. So we'll just shut her down and say goodbye, everybody.
I'm glad this is being recorded.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah. See ya.
Thanks, everyone.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.